And the Oscar goes to...
So he tells me you can't park the car there, but I'm like, look, there's only one dead hooker in the... Hello, welcome to the Film Ireland podcast.
Happy New Year, everyone. The Film Ireland podcast is back for some wholesome entertainment and, look at what's going on in the world of film. Of course, the big news from the other week is the Oscar nominations have been announced.
All white of them. I mean, all of them.
All Irish of them. It's been a really good year
and
for
people
Irish
complain
movies.
about a lack of diversity.
This must be what it feels like to be British every year.
I thought you were going to say a different nationality right there. I'm glad you didn't.
No, but British people are nominated every year, and this isn't to dampen it. It's like this is a really good success story where two of the Best Picture nominations are from Irish directors.
But Jonathan, Saoirse Ronan and co are all British also. The British are nominated again this year.
Yes, there was controversy of a Sky News reporter saying Saoirse Ronan was British, and he got really defensive about it on Twitter, saying like, well, it's the British Isles, anyway, you should take it as a compliment. And he was just like digging a hole deeper and deeper, being a journalist who knows nothing about social media. And the Waterford Whispers responded with a great article saying Irish actress Kate Winslet wins Golden Globe.
But I don't think it's hypocritical of us to be like, oh, you can't claim her, whereas we've claimed Daniel Day-Lewis and Jeremy Irons.
Who live here and have citizenship here. And
well, now they do. They didn't always.
You're completely wrong on this. It is, if you're a citizen of the country, I think it is okay then to say it is.
No, I know, but we've been
claiming
claiming Jeremy Irons for like decades at this point.
That we claim people who voluntarily choose to live here, whereas
Saoirse Ronan
has no
English.
connection. Saoirse Ronan has no connection to Britain at all, other than working there a lot. I'm just, this isn't a comparison to make. You're wasting your time.
Why are you Jeremy
doing this,
Irons
Richard?
sounds so very Irish.
Why are you doing this, Jeremy Irons? Look, we have Room and Brooklyn in competing in the Best Picture race.
And Donald Gleeson in everything.
Competitive. Donald Gleeson was in every movie he's been in this last year has gotten loads of Oscar nominations. So what does that tell you about Donald Gleeson, the lucky charm of...
The Illuminati is involved.
Domhnall Gleeson, as they called him.
I'd hate to be his brother, is all I'm going to say. Stuck doing... What was that airport comedy with Mad Men lady?
Oh, that was Standby, and
go.
he's now doing Rebellion, the series on RTÉ.
The heights just never cease to get higher for him. I'm sure Rebellion's fine. I haven't watched it yet, but
I'm gonna
RTE drama,
move
Star
swiftly
Wars.
on. Just talk a bit more about the Irish actors who are successful in Oscar terms. We have Saoirse Ronan being nominated for Best Actress. No, deservedly, and as I predicted. And I really hope she does win just to see the look on your face. I would be delighted. And of course I would be delighted for her because it is a very good performance. Even if the movie is divisive and...
At this point, I don't care. Brooklyn has gotten all the anger out of me it's going to get. I'm
if it
mad.
wins Best Picture.
No.
Oh, I
wouldn't be surprised if it wins Best Picture. That's the exact kind of shit the Oscars would go for. But it's akin to like the King's Speech when they win Best Picture. It's very safe. It is the Forrest Gump of this year's kind of crop of Best Picture nominations.
Whereas Room is really leading the pack, where we're going to be reviewing it in a little bit. It's in a league of its own.
That would be fine.
That would be great. It's not just Room being nominated for Best Picture, though, and it's the director, Lenny Abramson, being nominated for Best Director. We have a Best Adapted Screenplay nomination for both Room and Brooklyn. And to top it all off, we have Michael Fassbender, born in Germany, so I guess according to you, Richard, we can't claim him, even though he grew up here.
Well, I'm asking you now, if the Germans claimed him, would you be angry?
No.
Yes, you would.
Because we can... No, but there's a legitimate claim where it's like there's a German interest in it. I think that's the point of a lot of the media coverage, is that just it has been so good for Ireland that on top of all these nominations, we have Michael Fassbender being nominated for playing Steve Jobs in Jobs in the Best Actor category.
Neither of us saw and didn't want to.
And that matters a great deal to the Academy voters. Who,
it doesn't.
If you are listening, Brooklyn, please make Richard... We can get Richard. We can get him to react more.
You can't. It's done. It's gone. The hate has successfully flown through.
It's also worth pointing out that a category we often do have success in for an Irish filmmaker is Best Short Film. And live action short film category this year, there's a short film called Stutterer, which was produced in the UK, but one of the co-directors was an Irishman named Benjamin Cleary. Congratulations, because this was the first short film he had a director's role on, and it's now an Oscar nominee. So, across the board, there were just, so many great nominations for Ireland, and we're going to be watching it closely, because it's just exciting, I think, because there is interesting stuff going on in the Irish film industry. at the moment. So, you know, hopefully this isn't just like a lucky fluke where two particularly good movies got nominated one year.
You have recently told me outside of this podcast you've come around to my thinking on Brooklyn. You can't say two pretty good movies, one pretty good movie, and Brooklyn.
I'm look, my view on Brooklyn is evolving where I'm still, you know, defensive of it because I can understand why people who dislike it would really dislike it, but I also understand why why people who like it. While it may have been a good year for the Irish, there's another 4/5 of the globe who are feeling underrepresented at the Oscars. On social media, hashtag #OscarsSoWhite got going when it was pointed out that for the second year in a row, all of the 20 acting nominees were white people. And given the sort of demographic of Academy voters, I think it was about like 77% are male, 93% are white. A huge bulk of that is white guys in their 50s and 60s, quite set in their ways. They all, you know other people in the industry and want to sort of support them, put in a good word for each other's films. It ends up being, you end up having years where it does feel quite tight-knit. I mean, if we're just looking at the Best Supporting Actor category, we have Bane, Batman, The Hulk, and Rocky Balboa, literally Rocky Balboa, all nominated alongside Mark Rylance. Mark Rylance is the one kind of, I don't know, discovery, I guess you could say, and the rest of it is people who are already famous, already established, when, you know, the Oscars could be an opportunity to actually exalt other people who aren't, like, as big names yet.
You mean the industry's largest self-congratulatory backslapping awards could be opened up to include new people? I think one is living in a fantasy cuckoo land.
Well, I mean, charitably, or maybe a more charitable way of putting that is that the Oscars is a televised event. They want lots of people to watch, so they want lots of celebrities there. But the thing is, just not all celebrities are white, and it's certainly not all celebrities who do good work that is, you know, would deserve recognition at stuff like this.
No, I think
I lost trying of that sentence.
That's fine. It's okay. You're talking long enough. It's okay.
What's your take on that?
Well, no, I think this is a legitimate issue, and we were talking about this beforehand, and you brought up some very viable names, and I think that we're more deserving of nominations.
Benicio del Toro in Sicario, Amanda Brugel in Room, a small part of the police officer. I
don't think, the part's too small.
Oh, she was great, though.
She is good, but it is an Oscar.
But you have movies like...
Idris Elba I keep hearing about.
Yeah, Beast of No Nation. I don't know whether that was because it was on Netflix that the Academy discounted it or not. Maybe. You know, that's probably a reason they gave, but just even with... I mentioned before that the last year was actually quite a good year for African-American cinema. Like you had Dope, Tangerine, Straight Outta Compton. You had Creed, which is getting nominations, but not for the director or the largely black cast. It's for Sylvester Stallone, who's been around for ages, and I have a horrible sneaking suspicion that they are going to give the Oscar to Sylvester Stallone just as a kind of retirement present, pat on the back, but you know we'll get into that later.
Because wasn't Michael B. Jordan nominated for an Oscar last year for Fruitvale Station?
I don't think he was, and it certainly wasn't last year. If it was, because last year is when this Oscars So White thing started, because it was all white people. One person pointed out the Best Actress category. It's Saoirse Ronan, Jennifer Lawrence, Brie Larson, Cate Blanchett, and Charlotte Rampling. And somebody said they all literally look like the same woman at different stages of her life. And I'm kind of like, I'm reading that thinking like, I hate it when people say like, oh, all people of one race look the same. But then I look at the picture, I'm going like, oh my god, she's actually right. This actually does look like that would be an amazing movie to see though, if you had the five of them playing the one character.
I'd watch that, yeah. But anyway, I think the issue more personally for me is that I hate because this all came to light when Jada Pinkett Smith took to Facebook for reasons.
No, it came to light before that. It did come to light. She threw her,
and she was like, "My husband is so famous, and why haven't you nominated him for an Oscar for that movie he did about the Doctor Man and the head trauma?" Which I saw the trailer for before, I think, Room, and thought that looks like a pile of shit. And then now here she is, oh, why didn't you nominate Will Smith? Because maybe he wasn't that good, Jada, a.k.a. Fish Mooney. We all saw Gotham, we know what you did. I just feel like she seems to be trying to instigate some kind of quota system, which is always a dodgy way to go.
Are you sure you're not misinterpreting what she was...
okay, the news story I saw, sort of, it didn't, directly say, it implied that her and Spike Lee, the way they conveyed their opinions in the news report I saw, implied they were edging towards advocating for a quota system, and that's just a bad way of doing it. I do agree it shouldn't, this year at least, going on who was there, who made movies in the year, it shouldn't have been an all-white nominations
Straight
list.
Outta Compton, Creed.
Exactly.
There's loads of
Tangerine,
people listening. Yeah.
Girlhood apparently was very good. Didn't see
Yes.
it. There's lots of nominations, of course there is. But I don't like the idea of... Because if they did a quota system, it would just be Will Smith every year. Because they like him and people will watch him.
No, but it would encourage more production of different projects that have black actors tagged. So
Yes.
but there's more names around now than Will Smith. Like,
Yes, every year it would be Will Smith, Denzel Washington, maybe Michael B. Jordan if he gets a bit more famous, and like Wesley Snipes if he has like, some kind of comeback role.
no, but then
That'd be
there are people who like there are actors of color who will be in movies and they'll win an Oscar like in the supporting category or something, and then they don't do much else. Like they've given it to people of color who weren't big names before.
I'm not saying they haven't, but they were. This is very dodgy to talk about. They were quote unquote legitimate wins. Whereas if there was a quota system, and they have to put in a person of color into the nominations list, it will be Will Smith, Denzel Washington.
Well, I mean,
one or
this
two
whole
other
argument
ones.
about quotas, it's kind of like the inverse of that. It's like is as if the Oscars already have an unconscious quota that overly favors white people.
Oh no, it is, but
And they should just be casting a wider net and actually just sort of trying to be
But
more
they
inclusive.
won't.
But because they're all kind of, it's mostly middle-aged people who are and older who are like set in their ways, and they know lots of other people. But it's a huge. I mean, so it's like. First of all, it's a problem with how the Academy is voting, but it's all or the sort of demographic makeup of it. But there's also just an issue of, like, if the industry in general is a boys' club, or if it's just mainly white people who advance in networking. I mean, the gender issue again. There was no female nominee for best director this year. In Ireland last year, Waking the Feminists, another hashtag I think that sprung up about gender inequality in theatre and film. It's like it's an issue that comes up, and I think it's a valid one to raise. I'm not sure if we're going to reach any definitive conclusions here. Or,
you mean we're not going to solve the race issue
well,
on a
I think
podcast?
we should give
tonight?
it a go. I mean, it would certainly. The people listening would feel special having been there at that historic moment before people realised. What do you say?
No,
No,
I
we'll move
have
on
things to do. I haven't got time to solve the race issue tonight. Maybe next week.
You could solve the world's problems if you cared. Is that what you're saying?
That's part of
If
it.
you were
certainly.
bothered, if you were arsed. I think what we could do, though, is go through our predictions for what's going to win which category. But first, we could review some of the movies that have been out and are going to be in the Oscars. But first, there were one or two Oscar movies that are not in consideration for the Oscars, but we just thought we would have a short in other films corner just to review some other things.
Now, I'd like to begin this section by saying I finally watched Sisters, not really thinking I'd like it.
We reviewed this last year, but
No, you
I
reviewed this last
reviewed it.
year. You ranted about it for a solid 15 minutes, if memory serves. And I thought,
it serves you very badly, but go on.
that sounds bad. I don't want to see that. I saw the trailer. That looks bad. I don't want to see that. And then someone else whose view I like and tend to agree with, a friend of mine, said...
More
that
often than mine.
I'd say on par, but for different reasons. But she... No, I mean, because I love Kingsman, she hated Kingsman. You hated Sisters, she loved Sisters. Like, okay, I'll give Sisters a go just to see which of you I agree with. And, dear listeners, Sisters is nowhere near as bad as Jonathan said it was. I'm not saying it's Spy, I'm not saying it's Tangerine. It's good. It's funny, it's solid. It's a little bit too long, but...
It's definitely too long.
But
So
not as...
long.
Bridesmaids was far more noticeably too long to me.
But the story is more interesting, and I enjoyed it
No,
more.
the problem with Bridesmaids is there was no story. There was a story, but it kept tracking itself to talk about completely irrelevant scenes that were just there for... I don't know, Melissa McCarthy falling down probably. But this one, there was a very simple... Okay, I'll say this. The setup is definitely an Adam Sandler movie. This, if you switch the genders, is an Adam Sandler movie. I'm not denying that, and I'm not saying... If this was made, it would definitely be Adam Sandler and probably David Spade. No, Rob
That
Schneider.
satisfies me.
But this is funnier than that, because, okay, the Adam Sandler jokes, of which there are several, are quite hit and miss. The sort of toilet humour isn't great at times. But I think once it hits the party sequence, which goes on for, I'd say, a solid hour and a half, maybe? An hour 20. It's really funny. The escalation, because the start off, the beginning of that is really funny because of that whole, we're all so old... adult parties are just people sitting around talking about death. I thought that was really funny. And then it just escalates and keeps escalating. And then even the way they're trying to inverse the usual dynamic of her trying to shut the party down and the cops showing up and like, oh, she's a nice person. Now you have your party, enjoy. Like all that stuff, inverting all that crap. That was amusing. I know you said you hated that one character who's meant to be annoying, and
Yeah.
I hated him too when he was meant to be annoying. But once he was on drugs, he was very funny.
Yeah,
When
but
he's
even
walking
then,
around
it's just kind of
screaming.
it's kind of just lazy writing. Oh, get this character on drugs, and then they'll act crazy, and that'll be funny.
It's lazy, but it's effective. I'm a big fan of that kind of like non sequitur humor. So there's a bit when there's two characters in the room having a conversation, and he just walks by the room with a lamp on his head, screaming at them, and it keeps going. And that's the entirety of his role.
There's a kind of amusing sort of end to his character where he becomes where all this nervous energy he has before
Yes.
is just dissipated because he hooks up with someone, and now he's just completely calm and not at all sort of eager to please, and he's just sort of sure. So I mean,
Well,
there's
he's
stuff
scary.
that's
He's
kind
actually
of-
frightening.
No, but
It's
you see,
wonderful.
Okay, if I had to highlight positive
Yes.
things about Sisters, I think there are characters like him who were minor characters who they had a kind of one note joke, but they each had their own arc where it paid off in an amusing way. So Rachel Dratch's character, another one where she also takes drugs. And she goes into a room full of clocks and starts having existential angst over time and its philosophical implications. And later, for reasons we won't go into, when that room gets destroyed,
That was funny,
she then says, like, we did it, we overcame time or something. And so, I mean, I mean, I would agree to the extent that when the party starts, jokes start to land more often. I still think it's a pretty bad movie and totally missable, but it's the second half is better than the first. I just think the first half is way too long, and it just wasn't a great movie for me.
I was thinking about this. If you were to cut it down to 90 minutes, you'd need to lose most of that fat from the first half an hour.
Yeah.
But then that just leaves you with a 90-minute party movie and very little setup for it. And I'm not sure the setup is necessarily funny, but I think it's
Or
necessary.
good.
But you need it narratively, I think, just because the party sequence is most of the movie, and as it is, even though it doesn't ever outstay its welcome, it's still too long. But I don't know.
Well, look, I mean, the one character I did enjoy was John Cena. Did you enjoy him?
No, I didn't. That's the funny thing. As the one character, I was he was fine. Like I didn't actively hate him the way I did in Trainwreck, but he was boring.
My safe word is keep going. I was in tears. I was
Really,
anyway.
borderline rape humor. That's great.
Speaking of
But when the pool collapsed in the sinkhole, I just didn't know what was happening, and I actually just clutched my head and started laughing, and just like, what is going on?
no,
That was great.
it was so
It was
bad.
so
It's all
stupid.
that
It was
film.
incredibly dumb, but it was just the necessary level of escalation to such a ludicrous degree. Did you see Bad Neighbors?
Yes,
Did you like Bad Neighbors?
I did. Yeah.
This felt to me like a slightly worse version of that. It was kind of train
That
wreck
is
by way
fair
of Bad
enough,
Neighbors.
yeah.
I still think it's good, but it's not as good as Bad Neighbors or Spy or whatever else. Bad Neighbors 2 has come out. You know that?
I
The
didn't
trailer
know.
came out today.
Is it
I
a
haven't seen
sorority
it yet.
house or something? Or
No,
is
it still says
instead of a
Rogan, but now it's
fraternity?
Chloe Grace Moretz is the neighbor.
As a sorority
Yeah,
house.
and I think
Yeah.
then Zac Efron comes back to help him fight Chloe Moretz. Now, I want to see that movie based on that synopsis. I'm sure it'll be terrible, but that's an amazing idea
No,
for a movie.
when Bad Neighbors was out, I swear I saw on Twitter someone joking about the sequel is going to or that this movie would end with like Rose Byrne and Seth Rogen going, I'm sure glad that wackiness is over. But just at that moment, a sorority house like
Yeah.
pulls up outside the house and is going in, and it's like no, and credits roll. Like is how someone joked it would be. So they actually are just going for the really obvious setup for a
But it
sequel.
didn't need a sequel because it actually ends on a nice note of
does.
Zac Efron realizing that, I won't be immortal forever.
You see, Bad Neighbors
Yeah.
is a better example of what Sisters was trying to be because it
But
was
Sisters
it's
did
kind
that
of it has
too.
characters who have these kind of emotional arcs that are like relatable to sort of everyday concerns.
So did
whilst
Sisters.
there are these party scenes where people are doing crazy stuff, and it just struck the balance a lot better, and actually had a
Better,
decent
yes.
character dynamic, unlike Sisters.
I disagree. I felt
The
actually,
parents were awful. They were
They were fine.
So,
I mean, they
deaf
were
on
no
screen.
easy A
I'm
parents,
quite
but they were
close to death.
okay.
Easy A, the Emma Stone movie,
Yes,
we're really
there
bringing
was
that into it.
Stanley Tucci and who was the wife? I forget. They were both very funny.
Yeah, Patricia Clarkson.
Patricia
Look,
Clarkson,
will we?
But let me
move
just quickly
on?
finish to say, I disagree on that point about not having arcs. I actually felt really bad for Tina Fey's character towards the end when they called her up saying, we'll give you the money for the house. And then she's like, oh, maybe I should actually grow up as a human being. And then she starts trying to shut the party down. I was like, I actually feel genuinely bad for her now. I think Poehler and Fey elevated what was probably lackluster material into a decent movie, I think.
Not decent at all. Really lackluster. Shall we just agree to disagree on that?
I suppose we'll have to. It's a good thing we don't hate hint,
Look,
any other
will we
movies?
go to just a film I saw during the week? It was on the IFI and then it screened in Cork, Belfast and Galway. I hope it gets a cinema release soon so you can all see it. It was called Shem the Penman Sings Again. This was an Irish movie about James Joyce and a friendship he had with a singer called John McCormick. Do you know of John McCormick, Richard?
No.
Apparently, referenced in Miller's Crossing, the Coen Brothers film, used a lot in Boardwalk Empire. He was this kind of 1920s crooner from Dublin, and he and Joyce were friends back in 1904 when Joyce was considering becoming a professional singer. James Joyce, as we all know, figured I could probably make an okay living because I'm an all right singer, but I won't be as successful as I want to be. I want to be great, so he goes and he becomes the literary icon he is. Whereas John McCormick goes off and he has a very successful career, selling millions of records, very well known, quintessential music of the era if you ever hear it, but nobody knows who he is now. And James Joyce is the one who spent his life living in obscurity, struggling to find an audience. So documentary is partly about just how the flip occurs, where one was really famous and then it swapped. But the thing is, it was originally conceived as a documentary. What they decided to do instead is it's a kind of semi-biopic, but it's very abstract because most of it is shot in the style of silent films.
Mm-hmm.
But they do have reenactment of certain scenes from Finnegan's Wake, which were supposed to have been inspired by the relationship between James Joyce and John McCormick, and it has all these interactions where there's just something very clever going on. There's lots of pretty good music. The visuals are stunning. I just kind of, what I loved about it was that it actually had a good sense of aesthetic, and it looked great and shot things in a creative, interesting way, which so many Irish films fail to do. It's amazing how many Irish filmmakers don't think about aesthetics and how can you actually make a shot look interesting. So I hope it gets a wider release. I mean, I just to finish on this point, it's kind of like Joyce's writing in that it's good and you can go with the flow of it if you can go with the flow of it, but it's probably such a limited amount of people who would read it to appreciate it. Because I'm not saying this has popular appeal, but it is very good and very worth checking out. I mean, was there something that
I was going to make a jab at Brooklyn about aesthetics, but I'm not going to bother. What I was going to say was, it's interesting that you should mention a film that takes what is a biography, essentially, and makes an abstract, weird thing about it, making it more relatable and watchable as a thing. The Danish Girl is not that movie.
Okay, so last month I also reviewed The Danish Girl. I gave it quite a favourable review, but I've since been, learning how divisive the movie is. It kind of really divides opinion. I feel like you're about to make some points that I don't necessarily disagree with, but okay. I mean, to just go through them and...
Well, yeah, I went into this expecting it to be good, again, based on what you'd said, and almost immediately took a mild disliking to it, and by the end was quite irritated. But I don't think it's bad by any means. I'm trying to think of other Best Picture nominations this year. I think...
Because Danish Girl wasn't nominated for Best Picture. It is nominated for Best Actor and Best Actress.
Screenplay, maybe? No.
Not screenplay, no. It got a lot less nominations than they were expecting, because I think that the problem with The Danish Girl is that it tells the extraordinary story about Lily Elba, one of the first people to undergo sex change operation, but it does it in a very straightforward, kind of safe way.
Yeah, this is my issue. I think the trans experience, from what I understand from reading about it from writers and whatnot, is it's very... You can't literalize it. It's not easy to make it relatable to non-trans people, and... The problem with the movie is it's an admirable effort what they do, but it was misguided and failed from the beginning in that they were trying to make a very literal depiction of it, but what they ended up doing was making this strange, muddled, slightly borderline offensive version of things, whereby the first hour of that movie is not about a trans woman. The first hour of that movie is about a cross-dressing fetishist. It's because every time Redmayne has women's clothes on, he's just kind of go, and it's all about Vikander just touching him. Hang on, it's Einar and Gerda, yes?
Einar and Gerda.
Gerda,
yeah.
Sorry.
I've heard, just might get into this in a minute, but just a lot of trans people are critical of the movie, and one thing that comes up is that Einar's name is used a lot in discussions of the movie,
yes,
and that's offensive. You're dead naming them. But if this is a movie about the process of transition, I think... Depending what part of the story you're talking about.
Well, I also think the movie
itself
encourages talking about Einar rather than Lily, because the movie, and this is another point I really didn't like about it, it makes it very clear that Einar and Lily are literally two separate personalities. And that's not what it should be like. As far as I'm aware, if you're trans, yes, you hide your true self to an extent till you've kind of come out, but you're not literally two different people.
Yeah, it's not separated the way it is for a long
different
stretch.
personalities. He talks about different memories. It's
I mean,
very,
the book, the movie is partly based on Lily's own writings of her experience of it. So while it may not be representative of trans experience, it may have been a reflection of how Lily experienced it.
which is fine. The movie itself. Here's my problem with it. I think on a fundamental level, it's populist progressiveness, if that makes any sense. This is the movie that your grandmother will go see at a matinee screening, and it's going to... Have you seen that joke going around about Carol, where it was some old couple went to see it, and halfway through she goes, Harold, they're lesbians.
Yes, I love that. Some old couple. Yeah. Apparently one of them didn't understand what was going on. So it was like, Harold, they're lesbians.
This is that movie, but for trans issues. But let me just finish the point.
Is there a problem with that kind of movie?
But let me just finish what I was going to say. It's not a problem with that kind of movie. The problem is that it gives an incredibly simplified version of that toward the goal of making it relatable to old cis white people, and they don't matter. I know they're most of the box office, but they don't matter.
I think yeah. I mean, that is the issue with. There's a very good article actually. The Walrus, Canadian publication, which is their equivalent of the New Yorker. Yeah. I think they had a discussion between a trans writer and a cis writer, and they were talking about this issue of movies like this. In fact, in my own review, I think I alluded to Brokeback Mountain as a comparison, that there are movies that come along where it's showing, or it's trying to represent what experience is like for marginalized people with a view to, opening minds and changing attitudes of sort of mainstream audiences. But I mean, the obvious objection there is, why can't mainstream society just cop on?
Exactly.
Why do you need to argue for something as basic as human dignity? And so that's why Danish Girl anyway has rubbed a lot of trans people along with.
Well, it's not even that. It's the idea of trying to make an experience of a minority relatable to the majority. These terms are also loaded. You know what I'm saying, though.
Yeah.
But in a way that essentially discredits or at least ignores the viewpoint of the minority it's trying to show. Like in Danish Girl,
well, I mean, they consulted a lot of trans people when they were making, and
I'm sure they did, but it doesn't come across.
I'm reading about these issues more like from people's reactions to it. I still think it's, for all its shortcomings, it's still sensitive and trying to help. I mean, I don't think it's going to do harm, but there are people who do feel like it is doing harm, or they feel it's unforgivable that they cast a cis actor at all.
Those are issues I'm not going to get into. But I do feel that it never felt like a trans character to me. It felt like, first of all, it was a fetishist, then it has a split personality disorder, then there's that whole sequence where he's just saying he's a repressed homosexual, then...
No, it's people are accusing him of that,
but he doesn't really deny it, and it's a weird movie. Redmayne's very good in it. Vikander is great in it. I will say I completely lost any sympathy for Lily and Ian. I don't know how to talk about them because the movie makes it two different people.
Lily,
let's say Lily, because if Lily has the same memories as Einar, it's like talking about Doctor Who now. It's like generations. If Lily is Einar,
I think that says it. I think it's kind of, it was muddled in its execution.
So muddled. Okay,
if you can make a Doctor Who comparison, then okay. Look, I still think. I mean, the movie moved me. I thought it was touching still, but I mean, I totally get. I understand better why people are having problems with it.
What I was going to say, even dramatically though, as a piece of melodrama, I think it fails partially because I lost all sympathy for Lily purely because at the end when she's going out with Ben Whishaw or whatever, it's all like Gerda is so supportive the whole way through, and it's just thrown back in her face. Like she still wants to be married to her husband. She still wants to be at least friends with Lily. But there's Lily going, I met a nice boy, and talking about this is horrible to do to your former wife. Do you not think? Like, if you reverse situation of because remember with the Hans character?
Yes.
Where she sort of kisses him once and goes, no, I feel too guilty about it, and runs away.
No, but she's not dating Ben Whishaw. She's just hanging out with him as a friend. But I suppose it's
at the start,
still
they're
sort
going
of lack at the start they are, but no, at the
behind
end,
her back, and it's horrible. Yeah. And no, that Gerda is a saint. Lily was a
The
bit
movie,
of a...
the movie doesn't get across how famous Gerda was. Like, she was actually
No.
quite an important artist of that period, of the whole Art Deco movement, but the movie just makes it appear like, oh yeah, she had some good gallery runs and more people bought her paintings, but it didn't get across that she was actually a celebrity, like a famous person.
Actually, speaking of the gallery runs, that was one thing that occurred to me. I think there's a reading of this movie that is unintentional but incredibly fitting, is that her paintings aren't... They're doing fine, and then that one gallery owner doesn't want them until she starts painting Lily, and then suddenly it's, oh, now you're super famous, everyone wants you, blah, blah, blah. You could definitely argue the point that's the movie self-awarely reflecting the fact that it's commodifying the trans experience in the kind of populist highbrow art.
Mind blown.
And yeah, I look forward to those essays being written.
Wow.
Maybe by me,
I
not
mean,
by me.
I mean, one does wonder what might have happened with a more interesting director. At one point, Thomas Alfredson was attached, who did Let the Right One In and Tinker Tailor Soldier
That
Spy.
could have been
However,
more boring, but better.
However, the actor attached to play Lily and Einar was Nicole Kidman. And I think that would have been awkward because, first of all, she's not as good an actor as Eddie Redmayne, and it just... I mean, it's arguable. Okay, maybe if it was a cis woman, at least that would sort of highlight the point of transgenderism more. That's a woman all along. It's not a man becoming a woman. But, you know, at the same time... I mean, it was... I suppose it was just made for a general audience. It was made to have Oscar buzz, and they cast the person, like, from there, just leaving aside right and wrong, just from the financier's perspective, Redmayne had just won an Oscar for the exact same film structurally.
Oh, it was smart casting. That was, yeah.
You know, because it undergoes a physical transformation while his wife's really supportive. Like, it's beat by beat, just, it's so similar. So, you know, that's why really just for money, you know, they were doing that, and
that's what I'm saying.
rather than get one of the big A-list women to play Gerda and get a trans actor to play Lily, although they would have to play Einar as well then, so our transform feels about that. But no, but look, there should absolutely be more opportunity for trans people to tell their own stories. This movie might help in that process. Somebody who sees this might then want to watch Tangerine or Transparent or Sense8 or any of the other
I doubt it.
things that are on. I mean, that's the whole idea. And yes, okay, it's shitty that you have to, like, sort of convince mainstream society. But I mean, I don't think the movie will do harm on balance. Like,
I feel like it could oversimplify people's views, people who don't understand these issues, their views of how these issues work, and that could be potentially harmful.
Well, or it could lead to them having more curiosity.
Again, like the race issue, this is not
stone.
one we're going to solve tonight, so let's just move on.
Look, I mean, we're giving up on racial equality, on inclusion,
Harmony
of
for all
trans people.
mankind.
I mean, we're. I mean, at least tell me we'll get to global warming. I mean, I suppose what what we
is
could
a relevant movie to global warming?
There's a relevant movie to financial regulation, The Big Short. The Big Short is getting lots of Oscar nominations, lots and lots and lots. Best Picture, Best Director, Christian Bale as Best Supporting Actor, Best Adapted Screenplay, based on a book about the 2008 financial crisis and the weird stuff going on, the shady dealings of the American housing market in the years leading up to it. And it follows a few different people. It's from Adam McKay, who directed the Anchorman movies and had background in Saturday Night Live and stuff. So he's been directing comedies up until now. This is the first feature film he's directed that doesn't have Will Ferrell in it. And he's getting Oscar nominations for it. And I suppose it straddles the line between comedy and drama a bit, because there are kind of funny moments, but it is pretty dramatic. I mean, one of the things I was concerned about is that it does sound like a very Oscar baity movie because of the people involved. There's Christian Bale, Steve Carell, Ryan Gosling, and Brad Pitt, and its inclusion in all the nomination lists. I wasn't sure what kind of movie this would be, that it would just be kind of bland and safe, and it does something kind of interesting where that it's comfortable with drawing attention to itself. Or, you know, those scenes in Wolf of Wall Street?
Haven't seen Wolf of Wall Street.
Dear listener, where Leonardo DiCaprio is explaining all the financial dealings to camera and then saying, look, you can't follow this, just the bottom line. Movies about financial regulations and shady dealings are just, they're hard to make interesting, so the movie it has this voiceover, and it kind of gives up 10 minutes in and says, here's Margot Robbie in a bubble bath to explain. And then it's a 1 minute scene of Margot Robbie talking to camera, drinking champagne. explaining
Okay.
something. They do that a few times. They have actors break character, look at the camera, and say, "This isn't what actually happened. He found this out when he was having breakfast, and I was in town doing something else. But this scene was created for the movie to get across the information." It starts drawing attention to when it changes stuff from what historically happened, which I mean,
kinda cool.
Danish Girl is a guilty offender of doing that, but this is a movie that is also doing that, and then thinking, you know what, we can make a gag out of this, and that happens a few times. So it's interesting, and it's kind of, I mean...
Is it funny, though?
Yes, at times, yes. In terms of explaining the financial stuff, at first it completely fails to explain what subprime mortgage is and what all these different terms are. It does the sort of cop-out thing of saying you're not supposed to understand because bankers make it deliberately difficult to understand.
Yeah.
As the movie goes on, though, they start finding clearer and clearer ways to explain what's going on, and if all else fails, just tell by how angry Steve Carell gets, and you know it's a worse thing. It's like, do you ever hear that thing about trying to watch a movie on mute and seeing if you can still follow it? If you kind of watch this, try not to worry too much about what the words mean. If you just look at the tonality of the actors and what they're talking about, you should be able to follow it. And
it sounds kind of like a Michael Moore film done right.
That's... Oh, you know what? It's definitely coming from that liberal political place, but Michael Moore is really slimy, and it's kind of it's not quite in terms of like taking liberties with facts or having a really obnoxious tone. It doesn't go quite that far.
So I said done right. Like it's not as massively biased as films always.
Which is why I can see now why it's in the running for so many Oscars, because they might consider it a statement on the financial crisis, which
affected them all so badly.
Which America has yet to come to terms with, and which the ending of the movie makes quite clear because the bad guys win. And like up until this point, there are serious moments and there are funny moments, but the tone in general is lighthearted. And there are glimpses of the kind of darkness coming though, and it gets to the ending where it's just about how not only there's been no reform since the financial crisis, but all the sort of economic indicators that were going on before the financial crisis are happening right now. And it's just a really bleak... And it's not like a call to arms ending either. It's just sort of laying the facts out there and making you feel really hollow and disillusioned and afraid. So it's so on the one hand...
Sounds like my kind of movie.
From the way... Oh, you would love it, because it gets bleak, and the thing is the bleakness... If I said it comes out of nowhere at the end, that sounds like the movie wasn't tonally consistent.
Yes.
But I think the effect it has is that you're watching the movie and there are funny bits with Ryan Gosling and Steve Carell or whatever. And it gets the ending, then it kind of gets across the point that so many people thought, oh, these are the good times, and then the financial crash just hit and surprised them. The point of this movie is that it follows characters who see it coming, so they start betting against the stock market. The people who are sort of investing in them are getting more and more antsy because they're making these doomsday predictions about the economy. And the tension in watching the movie, because we must know that it doesn't have a happy ending anyway. But it's the idea that these scenes are really tense then, because it might say it's April 2007, and an investor will say, this is your last chance, you've been saying there's going to be a crash, and it hasn't happened, so you're just being a delusional. And as the audience, you're going, no, but they are right. But just like, so then you're wondering, well, how does this scene get resolved then? Because they have to like make it until the financial crash happens to prove that they were right. So I mean, it's definitely interesting. It's kind of it's pretty good. I'd recommend it. I mean, the one thing it did get an Oscar nomination for, among all of them, was Christian Bale's acting. And of all the performances in it, I think if anyone had to be nominated, I would have thought Steve Carell rather than Christian Bale. Christian Bale
is kind of the male Jennifer Lawrence now, in that every movie he does, if it's Oscar-y enough, he'll get nominated.
I thought that was Bradley Cooper.
Well,
because it's all these fucking guys in their 50s and 60s. They all like Meryl Streep for some reason. They all like Jennifer Lawrence for some reason. There's just a bunch of people they keep nominating.
I
whatever
like Meryl Streep and Jennifer Lawrence.
What Christian Bale does in this, it's a Rain Man kind of character. It's all based on real people, but this guy did have Asperger's, and this is something I'm a bit sensitive to, because I'm noticing this more and more in movies, whether it's Miles Teller in Whiplash or Jake Gyllenhaal in Nightcrawler. There are just certain movies I watch now where it's just like this is like a thing for male actors to do. They have to give like the autistic performance, and Christian Bale does this, and there are bits of it that are just a bit Rain Man-y and a bit stereotypical There are other bits though where he's talking to people, and it's just subtle things about the way he avoids eye contact, or he kind of sounds exasperated when he talks. That it's like those bits will ring true, but it's just a bit of a mixed bag. So it's on the whole like it's an okay performance, but it's being included in these Oscar nominations when, as I said, people were concerned about lack of diversity. Christian Bale has already won an Oscar in this category. As just kind of, what are the Academy thinking? Is it really on merit, or is it just they like certain people and they want to recognise their work?
Well, they do tend to go for actors that are trying to play people with illnesses or disabilities and stuff. So that makes a lot of sense as a safe casting or a safe Oscar nomination choice, that they would go for Christian Bale playing an Asperger's character. That makes sense. It's depressing, but it makes sense.
I mean, the movie...
Like the Tropic Thunder joke, I should not repeat the full joke, but...
Is this Robert Downey Jr.
Yes.
doing blackface? For which he got an Oscar nomination.
That was funny. That was so many levels of meta. It was funny. No, the bit in the movie itself when they're talking about... it was Ben Stiller's character, wasn't it? The never go full...
Yeah. Okay. You see, which Christian Bale doesn't, but it's a very nervy.
That's what I mean. That's what he was saying. Never go full, but you do it kind of in the middle level, and you get Oscar nominated.
Yeah, well,
that was a funny movie, wasn't it? In hindsight, Tropic Thunder was actually really good. Anyway, that was irrelevant to the current conversation.
I'm not looking forward to Zoolander 2, I must say.
You of all people, I thought would be.
The teaser trailer was very good. I did laugh. I was like, okay, no, this might be good. Then the second trailer comes out, and it's just it's there's the aside from the Benedict Cumberbatch thing, it's just not funny. It just doesn't look like it's going to be good. Then Benedict Cumberbatch, it's a jab at a particular model whose name I can't remember, who was transgendered, but plays a model called All, who is non-binary, transgendered, and just identifies all is all. And I think Ben Stiller was just careless. I don't think he was setting out to kick down at trans people. No. I think he just thought, isn't the mental image of a dead-eyed Benedict Cumberbatch saying all is all amusing? And that's what they went for. But it was completely... No, but then it's just like, it's like it's kicking down, you know, it's just like, oh, aren't trans people pretentious freaks, is the message of that, or of that clip, seeing it out of context of the movie. But the movie looks dreadful, so I'm not sure I will see it.
I still have a sneaking suspicion you'll like it purely because you put Anchorman 2 in your top 10 that year.
No, I took it out of my top 10 then. This was a few years ago. I decided Anchorman 2, no, that's not a top 10 movie.
It was there for a minute.
But,
anyway.
Adam McKay, anyway, he's gone from Anchorman 2 to The Big Short, so...
Oh, good call.
It's good,
nice.
But it's a good turning point for his career, and, I'm interested to see what he does now, because he definitely does do an interesting spin on this kind of movie, which are usually so dense and... kind of a chore to watch. This actually kind of moved along pretty well, so yeah, I'd say go see The Big Short. It's one of the big Oscar contenders anyway, alongside...
well, you mentioned chore to watch, a film that I know you found a chore to watch, but which again, in keeping with the theme of Richard doesn't hear John's opinions, I rather enjoyed. That is, of course, the allegedly 8th film from Quentin Tarantino. From what I understand, it only counts as 8 if you... What is it again? If you ignore 4 Rooms and count Kill Bill as one movie. Or something like that, I don't know. Tarantino, just jump off a bridge. But
please do that. Please do that, Tarantino.
And film it, but some slow motion score over it and make it all artsy, but just go away. Please Hateful Eight. So the story is, it's post Civil War. It's basically just a Agatha Christie movie, crossed The Thing a little bit, set in Red Rock,
Wyoming,
which I know got a few laughs in the cinema I saw it in. I was going,
because of the TV3 soap opera.
I hate Irish audiences so much. Said at Minnie's haberdashery, to quote in Tim Roth voice, which is the most delightful phrase I hear out loud.
I'm going to rip this piece of shit movie to shreds. Before I do, I will say Tim Roth was funny. His character was quite posh and very amusing, and it's him, Kurt Russell, and Samuel L. Jackson, Walton Goggins, Jennifer Jason Leigh, who's now nominated for an Oscar, even though her performance was quite hammy. That doesn't make it a good performance just because you commit to it. There's some pretty solid acting, but it gets so tiring to watch. It's
okay. I went in expecting the length to bug me. I really did, because I got very bored of Django, and this one I think is longer than Django and confined to one location. So I was really going in, bracing myself for this to be excruciating on a level similar to Brooklyn or Hard to Be a God. It was not.
It absolutely, it so was. It's so I'm. We definitely watched the same movie, right? Where it's 2 hours and 40 minutes, and it takes forever to get to the shack, and then most of the movie is set in the shack, and then more than 2 hours into the movie, there's a flashback saying earlier that morning,
which was necessary narratively. We'll get that in a minute. Anyway, what I was going to say was, Hard to Be a God. Difference is that the dialogue made sense here. It flowed from scene to scene, and it was
no, it did not flow. Okay, this was a huge.
You clicking your fingers does not make you
Tarantino.
right, but okay.
This Tarantino is overwriting his dialogue
Yes.
way too much
Always
in
did,
this
though.
movie. There, it'd be exchanges like, "You sure look sorry since that thing you did. Did you hear about the thing that he did? No, I didn't. You didn't hear about the thing that he did? No, why don't you tell us about it? You're telling me you didn't hear about the thing that he did?
I found
No,
that
so
funny,
just tell us.
honestly.
Well, boy, it's sure a sorry story. Are you sure you want to tell me about? I really
found that
wanted
scene
to
funny.
die. I really wanted to die. It was so, oh god, excruciating, hacky writing, awful. Also talking about the characters having done stuff that sounds like a more interesting movie than the movie we get. I mean, the story is that they're all in this shack. Jennifer Jason Leigh is a prisoner of a bounty hunter, played by Kurt Russell.
Mm-hmm.
And they have to get through the night. Kurt Russell suspects something's a bit dodgy, that at least one of the people in the shack is actually in the same gang as her and is trying to spring her free. So it's a mystery all about kind of trying to narrow it down to who it is. The movie almost gets interesting when coffee is poisoned and some characters die, so they have to narrow it down further as to who poisoned the coffee. That would have been interesting, even though you've no reason to invest in any of the characters because they're all awful people. Like, that
Not
would have
a
been
problem.
interesting if it got there sooner. I felt like this was too long. This could easily have been under 2 hours. Easily. It was...
Yeah, but so good
So
Inglourious,
frustrating to
so
watch.
good Django, so good everything. This is just... I think you have to accept certain things about Tarantino at this point. This is the movie he's going to keep making.
This
He's
feels
going to
really different to Inglourious Bastards and Django Unchained. The characters in those movies were charming. You cared about what happened to them.
No.
Like, this dragged so badly.
I didn't care about Django for the entire movie Django. I didn't care Christoph Waltz in Django. I didn't care about... Okay, for my money, this is better than Django. If I was ranking Tarantino movies, Django is at the bottom. This is second from the bottom.
This would come dead last for me. Like, this is worse than Death Proof, people.
Okay, I haven't seen Death Proof, so I can't rank that one. But I think, yes, I'll agree with you, the characters are all horrible, but that's the point of it. This is actually the perfect example of something that's been bugging me for years. When people talk about movies with antagonists or antagonists as protagonists, this is what it should always look like. The comparison I keep coming back to in my mind is Hannibal Rising, because in that movie they went, here's Hannibal Lecter, he's the bad guy, let's make a movie about the bad guy. So who's he hunting down? People worse than him. No. You do not make the character that is an antagonist relatable or nice. Hateful Eight gets it right. They're all horrible people. You want them all dead. And you basically get your wish. And that's good, but they're all enjoyable while they're there. Tim Roth is funny, Sam Jackson and enjoyable, Kurt Russell is gruff and amusing, Bruce Dern is fine, Jason Leigh, I thought she was great. Walter Goggins was brilliant, even though I absolutely despise his character. I really hated his character in particular, but I still thought he was fun to watch. He was enjoyable. Michael Madsen is only here because Tarantino feels sorry for him and keeps giving him money because he's so very much in debt to Tarantino himself, I think, actually, at this point. No, I think if any complaints I have about it are, I don't think it's visually as interesting as it could have been. I still feel they did a very good job, given that it's one location primarily. It never got boring visually per se, but it is disappointing given how visual Tarantino is, and given that this was shot in like 70mm and stuff, I think. Or not shot, but presented in...
Yeah, very rare film format for these days anyway.
It's a bit of a waste, because there's some landscape shots, but not many.
The landscape shots are of snowy mountains. I would have found them impressive if I hadn't already seen The Revenant at this point.
Revenant was far
just
superior
takes it
for
to a
that,
whole
yes.
new level. So, that is unfortunate, but...
But quickly on the length thing one more time. If this was released on Netflix or straight to DVD, that length's unforgivable. It really is. I think if you're in a cinema with it, it's fine. It never dragged per se for me. I think it was all okay. It was fine. It's sort of like a Gaspar Noé film. It's sort of like Hard to Be a God. It's one of those, if you're sitting in a cinema, it's okay. If you can't leave, you'll pay attention to it. If you're watching it at home, you'll be bored and leave.
If he did this as a play, as it was at one point intended to be, I don't think I'd have as much of a problem with it. I think because it's mostly set in the one location. If this was a play, kind of, you forgive them for having the dialogue explain everything and have nothing explained through visual storytelling. It really just feels like this is the reason I hate this so much is because I like Tarantino's other movies. And here, it just feels like a failure of visual storytelling. The way he has to explain so much about the other characters rather than showing it. The way that he starts narrating the movie more than halfway through it to fill in the gaps of what his footage couldn't get across. The flashback felt really clunky to me. And
Disagree.
it dragged way too long. The editor should be barred from the film industry. Tarantino should just start writing plays and keep doing that, not inflict another movie on us. I've really turned against him in this one. It just really grated with me.
The funny thing
It
about
was
the
so
editing
frustrating to watch.
that you're saying is that I download the soundtrack, and you know, like some of the soundtracks will have those
Legally?
bits. Yes,
And-
no, legally. I can show you the iTunes to see if you want. But no, you know, sometimes soundtracks have those bits where it's just like audio samples in the soundtrack, just on the like minute long bits or whatever. There's one in there of an interaction between, I think it's Bruce Dern and Sam Jackson, Walter Goggins, which isn't in the movie. It's like a minute long scene that wasn't in the movie. It's on the soundtrack, and I can see why they cut it out. It goes nowhere. So the editing was definitely.
Oh no, there actually,
They actually
was
did
more
good editing.
fluff.
Yes,
there was
even
more fluff than
and
what I
like
got.
genuine fluff. That was terrible. And I'm glad they cut it out. But
Oh, Muhammad, peace be
I-
upon you.
what was I going to say? I feel like
Wasn't there a
one-
scene that exactly copied Last House on the Left, like with the
I saw Last House on the
soundtrack and
The soundtrack
camera
apparently
movements and everything?
includes bits from The Exorcist 2, Last House on the Left, and then Morricone's unused themes.
You see, usually I like Tarantino's choices of music as well, and I'm just like, again, I really hate this movie. I think it's awful shit, but I'm someone who likes Tarantino's other movies, and I feel like this represents a real low point.
I
for
feel
him,
the
so-
soundtrack though was nicely reined in. I feel like if there was too much licensed tracks, like there's obviously a bit of White Stripes in there. There's that Roy Orbison song at the end, but there's only like 3 non-score songs, and I think that was a good number because. Like, again, I love Inglourious Basterds and I love the soundtrack to that movie, but it is very jarring at points. Like, you know, David Bowie, rest in peace, playing during the montage scene or something like that. It's very weird, and I feel like this one, it felt more hermetically sealed both visually and hourly, and I think that's fine. And I know you didn't like the voiceover. I thought it was fine purely because.
It's him admitting he's failed as a filmmaker.
No, I feel like it would have added another 10 minutes to the movie to show those things
Could
visually.
he have at least? Could there have been a bit of voiceover at the start? Then again, 20 minutes later, if you're going to introduce voiceover at all, at least have it a thing that's all the way through the movie. Don't wait till more than halfway through the movie before you introduce it. I would hate it less if it had been like, if it didn't just start happening. Like,
Well, to put the same question to you then, did you find it a problem in Mad Max Fury Road, the fact that he kept upping the frame rate every now and again, purely when scenes drag, he just upped the frame rate so that it wasn't fast forward?
no, that didn't bother me. I thought you were going to ask me about...
Because that happened like maybe 3 times tops, but it happened out of nowhere.
I thought you were going to ask me about how Tom Hardy has voiceover at the start and end of it, but not
No, that's
through
fine, I
the
don't
rest
care
of
about
it. No, but I hate that. I think if you're gonna, first of all, you should avoid voiceover if you can, but if you are going to use it, at least make it part of the movie like A Clockwork Orange or Fight Club does. Like, you know, don't just have it a bit at the start and a bit at the end. Certainly do not, Oscar and Palme d'Or winning filmmaker Quentin Tarantino, do not put it more than halfway in through your movie before you introduce it at all. Like, that is... Oh, it's such a failure. It's
No, I think it's an issue purely. It's a tool in the box rather than a necessary, like a narrative technique. Yes, if you want to have voiceover the whole way through, you can do what you're saying. But I have no issue with someone just halfway through putting voiceover in. That's fine to
I
me.
really, really do. It's
And the flashback also. This is you're saying it should have been a play. It could have been a play or a novel. That's a very novel structure where while you have the story, there's a very sudden out of nowhere twist with no context, and then you flash back to show the twist being set up. That's fine.
even
the
though it's
flashback
split
was
into
fine.
6 chapters and 2 of the
Which
chapters
is the thing
are
he
much
always
longer than
does,
the
and
others.
there's no reason for
But then
that. There was no
Kill
reason
Bill
for that in Inglourious
Bastards,
Bastards
it doesn't,
either.
like, yeah, but it's not as it doesn't stick out like a sore thumb the way it does here. Like
It didn't really stick out for me here because that's just his thing now. He just does chapters for no reason. Like it wasn't necessary in Inglourious Bastards either. It's just it's there now, and that's
well, to me, it's a decline. To you, it's
fine. It's perfectly fine.
Well,
I enjoyed it.
and we rhyme.
I probably wouldn't watch it again soon, but I'll never watch Django again either. So it's fine.
We'll agree to disagree. R.I.P. David Bowie, and also Alan Rickman, who also passed away.
And some guy from a band called the Eagles.
You know, all of you.
But that's not a movie thing, so let's move on.
We're losing so many beautiful souls. But I think we can press on. Maybe a story, maybe a movie about endurance and the human spirit kind of just pushing through adversity. Was there any movie out like that recently?
I feel like we can pick from a couple of them, both being with the letter or.
Yeah, well, we have The Revenant, which is getting lots of Oscar buzz, especially for Leo. Let's just get this out of the way.
Leo, or as he says his name in the movie.
He's not a xenomorph. He's a fucking. There's
a lot of true teeth breathing.
He's based on a real person in 1820s colonial America who gets mauled by a bear, is betrayed and left for dead by his
Bane
company of hunters he's with, played by mainly Tom Hardy, Bane, and he survives and tries to hunt Tom Hardy down for revenge.
Essentially, yeah.
Yeah, and it's become a thing now. People are expecting Leonardo DiCaprio to win an Oscar. This has become a thing.
I've never got this. Like, I've always thought he's good.
He's a competent actor. He delivers his lines. He emotes. He's good at shouting and explaining things.
But you can always see the acting. You can always see the acting. He never vanishes into a role. It's always DiCaprio
I think
acting.
there are two exceptions to this.
Catch me if you can.
Catch me if you can. Okay, yes, I've seen bits of it actually. I've been meaning to watch it.
Good.
Okay, so there are three exceptions. There's that. There is Django Unchained, where I do think he disappeared into the character.
Yeah.
It wasn't just, Leonardo DiCaprio.
I'll go with that.
And I think he did disappear into the character here.
I think he did for portions of it. When he's doing the mouth breathing acting, which is a good chunk of the first hour, I was very much aware this was DiCaprio acting with a capital A, and it was a bit funny at times. Because he doesn't have dialogue for a solid 90 minutes, I think. It's all just wheezing and grunting and falling and moaning and
it's
cauterizing his own wounds with gunpowder and sort of.
I mean, we'll get to his chances as an Oscar contender when we go through our Oscar predictions. The movie as a whole, I was blown away by the first hour of it. I thought it looked amazing. The middle drags, because a lot of it is like him walking across a snowy vista. Now he's set up a campfire for the night. Now he's walking across another snowy vista. And it kind of drags a lot in the middle. Then the ending I thought was stunning. There is a fight scene with such good choreography.
Yeah.
The fluid long takes of Emmanuel Lubezki are something I adore. This is the same cinematographer as Children of Men. He has won Oscars 2 years in a row now for Gravity and Birdman. He's done Terrence Malick's recent movies. He is.
Oh, has he? That makes so. I was thinking during this is very Terrence Malick in places.
Because
good.
And Terrence Malick is not a good filmmaker. He's a great video artist.
Mm-hmm.
If his movies were like 10 minutes long and were in galleries, I'd love them. Cat in the Hat, the Dr. Seuss movie of Mike Myers. Emmanuel Lubezki also did that. I only just throw that in because it's bizarre that he's one of like the single best cinematographers working in the world today, but he did that movie. But it's an Arri Alexa shooting natural light in the Canadian Rockies and the Argentinian Andes, and it moves so fluidly. I just don't know how they could have had a film crew there at all. It's not quite the same as Gravity or Birdman, where it's very smooth long takes that like make a thing out of how long it is. It will cut to another shot if it needs to, but often they just stage it in such an interesting way. That like it really looks stunning. I thought it was also well crafted, the production design and everything. Do you think Domhnall Gleeson is good in this? Because this seems to be a thing for you every time we discuss what kind of role he's suitable for. Here, Domhnall Gleeson plays the captain of a company of men who get attacked by.
He plays General Hooks again, but for kind of the opposite side.
For the opposite, that's good.
Well, actually, no. He plays General Hooks on the same side, just for meant to root for the Empire this time.
Are we referring to the sort of issue of Native Americans in cinema? That I kind of. Here's what happens with the a scene early on in the movie, where Leonardo DiCaprio's company is attacked by Native Americans, and lots of them are dying, but the take just keeps on going. So it's really exciting. Is it bad? I don't feel bad for them because they are technically invading the country the Native Americans have lived in for centuries, and I kind of like I'm not happy about their deaths, but I'm kind of like that's fair enough. It's because it's like.
As a misanthrope, I felt bad for no one. It was all fine. I was happy that Hardy got his just desserts at the end.
I mean, there's a thing with these kind of movies where they make it all about the white people. Native Americans have these tragic stories to tell, but as we discussed earlier, Hollywood makes certain kinds of movies of certain kinds of people. With this movie, there is at least a subplot about a Native American who has his own quest for avenging wrongdoings against his
Which
daughter.
I thought was actually paid off very nicely. I
Yes.
didn't quite see that intersection of those two storylines coming the way it did. And that was quite well done.
Yeah, so I don't think it's kind of there yet in terms of like a great portrayal of Native Americans, but certainly it was a lot more sympathetic and humanizing than it usually is in Hollywood movies.
Well, I feel on the whole, I was very anxious about seeing this because I did not like Birdman. I really didn't. It really annoyed me. And the combination of Birdman and DiCaprio, the combination of Iñárritu and DiCaprio, I was kind of like, oh, this is going to be some insufferable shite. It is very good. I actually don't even think the middle bit dragged the way you said it did. If anything, I found the more boring pieces just when he was still in his
Company.
stretcher, kind of going,
Yeah.
that was a bit dull for me. I really like this. I think it's visually stunning. It looks... Yeah, it's very Malicky, but Malicky with a better story around it. I think thematically there's undeniably some Herzog in there, although I think it gets more linear towards the end, which is not a problem. It kind of, in my mind...
There's a bit of a muddled kind of resolution we won't get into, but there's just in terms of the theme of vengeance and an expression like only God can give out vengeance or justice. Justice is in God's hand, revenge is in God's hands. It was some kind of thing like that motivates a character to do something that then you think it's like them turning their back on something, but at the same time they're causing the thing they wanted to do.
That same thought occurred to me and it kind of annoyed me. But I do feel like it's hard to watch this and not see Aguirre Wrath of God. And it kind of feels like The Force Awakens to Aguirre's New Hope, if that makes sense. And it's sort of a retread of the same plot, and not the same plot, but the same rough arc, and even the whole boat thing is clearly a reference to it, but with shinier, newer technologies, and Donald Gleason also again.
I think this might be remembered as a classic. I think the test is a few years from now, are people still going to talk about this movie? I have a hunch they might.
I have no impetus to watch it again, but I could see myself wanting to kind of give it a go in maybe 2 years' time, but... Sort of like Hateful Eight, it's very much a cinema experience.
Yeah, see this on a big screen, biggest screen you
DVD.
can. See it on the biggest screen you can. Oh,
there's one shot in particular when it's I assume it's a helicopter shot of them following Leo walking through what looks like a frozen lake.
Yeah,
and he's like this like speck on the screen, and I wish I'd seen an IMAX for that one shot.
But it actually gets closer and closer to him, doesn't it? Surprisingly, it does such creative things. Yeah, this is really, really good filmmaking.
Downside,
of a high caliber.
The bear fight's a load of crap. Everyone was talking about how great the bear fight was.
That was so tense.
It was fine. Bits of it were cool. It was fine. Very clearly a CGI bear. You could have at least got a guy with some fur on him. I don't know. Anything. Like, it was impressive that it was largely one take. Again, that's the other thing I'm going to say. The one take thing, yes. This was a much better deployment of the one take than Birdman. Because it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't constant. They used it when they could, but they would cut away if they needed to. Thank you for finally reining yourself in Iñárritu, because this is... Now I'm like, okay, maybe he's a good filmmaker. Maybe he can make a not insufferable pile of wank. So yes, Revenant, pretty good. Not amazing. Pretty good.
How many more movies do we have to discuss?
I think it's just the one, then not Oscars.
And it really is the one. It is... Of all the other movies we're recommending, I feel bad recommending anything else while Room is in the cinemas. I think Room is in a league of its own, far above anything else that's been out this past year. It was... It really is emotionally gripping, and I cried.
Mm-hmm,
Actually, you said you were brought close to tears.
I think what I said was, my streak of not crying at movies remains unbroken, but this came close to breaking that streak a couple of times. What did you say?
Heartless.
Like, you bastard? You were angry at me for this fact for some reason.
That the fact that it's just you were close. I kind of thought, like, I really want to know whether Richard will like this, or would he think the scenario of a woman and her son being held captive, if he wanted it to go bleaker than it did. I was kind of curious to see how you'd
Here's what I think about that. I actually think it in many ways it was bleaker than it initially appears, because it's a hard film to talk about. I don't want to spoil it, but then again, I don't feel there's much to spoil because you can kind of guess everything's going to happen. But it's fascinating the way, and again, I'd heard this about the book years ago before I even knew the movie's coming out, that because I think the book is all from the kid's point of view, isn't it?
I don't know.
I think so, because the film sort of is, I suppose, to an extent. And it is fascinating the way she made like a game out of his existence, and he's happy with it. And then that scene when she's trying to explain like reality to him is just, it's horrifying. Like, it's not depressing, or it doesn't make me sad, but I was just horrified. Like, the level of kind of existential claustrophobia.
Yeah.
That it just hits you, and it's awful.
It's a beautiful exploration of something. Emma Donoghue wrote the novel Room is based on them, but she also adapted the screenplay. She's got an Oscar nomination now for it. We were talking about Danish Girl and how that's based on a book where the prose explains the stuff about transgender experience. Yeah. It may not, for some viewers, not come across in the film, but I mean, she has her own challenge anyway of adapting this novel she wrote, taking it apart, putting it into another medium. What I love about it, like that she touches on this thing of structuralism, which was this whole school of philosophy about why we decide a word has a certain meaning or different symbols have different meanings. So the premise is inspired by real life cases like the Joseph Ritzel case, where a young woman played by Brie Larson has been locked in a rapist's shed for 7 years in the time she's had his child, and the son is now 5 years old. Yep. And she has brought him up on the pretense that the room is the entire world, or like he doesn't even know the word world, he just knows room, and that there's nothing outside the room. When he's 5 years old and she feels it's and she's trying to mount a kind of escape. She's trying to escape, so she now explains to him about the world. And as you said, the scene is just it's quite difficult to watch. I mean, there are a lot of difficult scenes to watch, but there are scenes that are just so moving because Brie Larson is so good in this. Like I think she's guaranteed to win an Oscar.
I'd like to hope so. I mean, every time I see her in something these days, I can't help thinking, oh, it's that chick from Scott Pilgrim, because that was the first thing I saw her in.
Envy Adams. Yes, she's Michael Cera's ex-girlfriend.
But now it's like,
who's now the lead singer of a band. I thought she was so funny in that, and the fact she's in this as well.
Well, no, but even like Short Term 12 last year, the year before, I was like, oh, it's a Scott Pilgrim chick, and now this, and it's like she is a phenomenally good actress, and I don't know why she was showing up in these things.
You know who else is phenomenally good? Jacob Tremblay.
Yes.
Playing the young boy. I think he was only like 8 or so when they filmed it, and he's winning all sorts of awards now, but he's not Oscar nominated. That's completely back-asswards. Like, that is absolutely one of the strongest performances of any actor this year.
Because Beast of the Southern Wild kid got nominated, so why can't he?
Who did?
Beast of the Southern Wild child.
And she was great in that, so I don't see why there should be a reason, not to cast them. It's... Oh, no, he really got
Christian
overlooked.
Bale had to be nominated instead, damn it.
But this movie wouldn't work without him.
He was playing a challenging character.
You either get Jacob Tremblay or you get Jake Lloyd when you're casting child actors. I kind of feel... Are there any mediocre child actors who were okay? Mara Wilson, I suppose, in Mrs. Doubtfire.
The kids from The Visit were both very not annoying, but not like...
Nor were they brilliant.
No, they were good, though. They were serviceable
Earth from Echo is similar, I suppose.
Ty Simpkins, I'm a fan of. He's always consistently not annoying in movies, which is good.
But yeah, it's always a risk when you have a story like this. But I mean, this is definitely a story that just takes risks in general. But it's all shot so well. There isn't like... It's exactly as long as it needs to be. There isn't like a frame of it wasted. There isn't a detail that's misplaced. Every line of dialogue, every sort of prop in the background... It's the kind of movie where, I mean, we were talking about The Revenant, and like it's brilliant. I mean, this part's a bit weird, which is a shame, and maybe this could have been different. We have those kind of discussions. I don't know what more I can say about Room, because I can't think of any way that I would improve on it, which is a really rare thing to say about a movie.
But I was worried going in, because I thought, okay, I assumed, because I haven't read the novel yet, that it was all based in Room, and I was very happy that that's about the first half of the movie, and then the second half... Again, is this a spoiler? I don't think it is. The second half
I don't mind it being a spoiler, because I think it makes... It is an interesting story, what happens after...
That's what I'm going to say, yeah. I'm glad that it actually focuses on their life after getting out, because most movies in this sort of genre would kind of end with them returning home happily with the media fanfare around them, and they live happily ever after. This one, though, especially in keeping with what we were talking about last month with the Mockingjay thing, like, this deals with PTSD. This deals with the aftermath of living in the normal world after a traumatic one.
A really disgusting, disturbing situation that is horrific, and it's like the repercussions that as they're trying to come to terms, as she's trying to come to terms with her life, but also like the son is now seeing the world more, but it's all about kind of being intimidated by the scale of the world or life itself, but even
how our parents react to it. And I think actually, if I had a few minor complaints, I think William H. Macy's character isn't dwelt upon enough. I think he was interesting, and there's that one scene at the dinner table where
Yes.
the implications.
But they kind of don't resolve that. I kind of like that. I like how it is just the assumption that he has, like, really read the situation wrong, and he's just not going to be part of their lives. I mean, it's. Like,
I didn't feel they needed to resolve it, but I felt they could have explored it more because it was hinted at for a single scene and then it was gone.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's pretty good. I mean, like.
He is good.
Joan Allen.
She was great.
The guy who plays Leo, who I forget, but just a really kind guy.
Not Ian McShane, yes. Whoever that was.
Black police officer who finds Jacob's character, played by Amanda Brugel.
She's a great minor character. She isn't in enough of the movie.
They've done this before, where they nominate an actor for Best Supporting Actor, and they have like one scene. Judi Dench won for like Queen Elizabeth and Shakespeare in Love, and she's barely in that. There were like 2 actors nominated for Network who only had a scene each.
Well, I always thought Hopkins for Silence of the Lambs was underused. He had 17 minutes screen time. She had maybe 2.
Yeah,
like less probably. Like she was. I'm not saying she wasn't great. She was great. That was actually probably the scene
perfect for what it needed
came
to be.
Closest to
like,
crying at.
Right,
yes.
right. Because I was bawling at that.
Okay,
point.
that was the closest I came. The whole escape sequence, I was like, this is surprisingly tense and emotional.
Right, because like, yeah, it's just also well shot. I mean, wow,
it's well shot, but also I just feel like because they've done such a good job explaining how he doesn't understand the world and like his view of reality is just room. So when he's escaping and you're trying to in your head recognize the fact that he needs to follow her instructions, but he's also being overwhelmed by every single sense he has and just all these new experiences. It makes for a surprisingly kind of tense non-action scene almost. But yeah, no, I think so. You have no complaints at all about it. I have 3. One I've already said was the William H. Macy thing.
Okay.
I think the score was nonsense. Not nonsense. I think the score was so minimalist as to be pointless. I think the film could have survived without score. Almost.
I get uneasy about movies that don't have score.
I wouldn't have noticed it though,
music,
I don't think.
The absence of music can make something really drag or really just not have the same weight it could.
But there was so little score in the movie to start with that most scenes were scoreless regardless. I don't feel that the score they had added anything. It felt very much for the first half at least like your typical art house movie score where it almost felt like it came from like an app or something. It was very... Whoever did the score, I apologise for disparaging you so completely. But I didn't... Were they not? They
are not. They are not nominated.
Oh,
no, I was just checking.
I was like, no way. The other thing is, I didn't like his voiceover. It was necessary in certain scenes just to, in a Tarantino-esque way, keep the story moving and it pass some time.
Leave him out of this.
And pass some time. But I didn't actually like Tremblay's voiceover. It was slightly annoying, and I think he could have lived without it.
The acting. Him in scenes though, he's
great in
so
scenes,
solid.
yes.
It's like amazingly. He's a real phenomenon. So we certainly want to watch his career. We want to congratulate Lenny Abrahamson being nominated for Best Director. That's a huge deal. I mean, if we were going, so I mean, this is see it. It's like it's one of the most amazing films I've seen in a long time. It's the power it has like on the audience. The whole audience was sobbing when I saw it.
Yeah, I could hear that kind of sobbing noise too. Although I heard more sobbing for
sniffling and whatever.
What you call the thing that was a pile of shit with the cancer kids.
Cancer kids.
The John Green one.
Oh, Fault in Our Stars.
Fault in Our Stars, which was just, Taylor targeted to make young women cry, and sitting in an audience, a full packed auditorium, with them all in synchronization going, was kind of amazing, because it was so synchronized, and that film was so manipulative, but not good. This was much better.
Did John Green also do Paper Towns?
Yes, I haven't read that.
Because it's just a funny story. Just very quickly, when I went to see Straight Outta Compton last year on opening day, Paper Towns started playing instead, and the entire audience groaned and started walking out, and they fixed it like a minute or two later. But it's just all the counter programming there. Like that was like the whitest movie in the history of white. They could have started playing.
I would honestly rather watch Paper Towns than Straight Outta Compton, but that's just
Straight Outta Compton was so good.
No interest in rap
overlooked by the Academy Awards.
Which I'm surprised at. I mean, we'll get to this in a minute. Let's finish off Room.
Room, absolute. I can't recommend it. You have to prioritize seeing this before any other movie. See it with an audience. See it with someone. Don't go by yourself. Have someone you can talk to about afterwards.
Quick question about it now I think about it. I think structurally, I thought it was very well done. And yeah, the direction in the first hour is definitely amazing because it's such a small space. He did an awful lot with it. Well done, Lenny, blah, blah. Anyway, I think structurally it really works because, yes, the first half is all there and the second half is all the outside world. But do you think it could have been worthwhile sacrificing some of the room time to leave more room for sequences like William H. Macy or the suicide attempt to breathe? Because both of those, not so much the suicide attempt, that I think it could have done with more time, a bit. It was very, not quickly glossed over, but it was sort of brought up and resolved fairly quickly and then kind of speed it towards the finale. I'm wondering if I don't know if the film needs to be longer, but I feel like you could maybe have cut out some of the actual.
I think you touched upon stuff there that could be considered a spoiler.
Yeah, but I'm not giving.
But we have. I feel like I felt like my experience of watching it was that like it was as long as it needs to be. Now whether within the movie, maybe less time in room, more time in. But I mean, you also like. You can't, because it would be torturous to an audience. It would be like that French horror film Martyrs. You can't just like. You can't spend too long showing what it's like living in the one room for so long, but it's 7 years. You need to have like some sense of what it must be like to be in there for so long. And it's a really well designed set. No, I mean I've no complaints about it really. I mean it's like okay. I mean like your brain went there to the place where it's like what could have been different about the movie, and I usually do that even with movies I love, but this time. I was just really blown away, and I was really surprised as well. I mean, like, I liked Frank, but I wouldn't say I'm the biggest fan of Abramson's work, and this is just, like I said, a league in its own, far above anything else that's been out lately.
From what I've seen of his, it's definitely his best one, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, Frank was enjoyable, What Richard Did was fine, but this was, it's definitely surpassable of those. I haven't seen Adam and Paul, or Garage. He did Garage, didn't he?
Yes.
Yes.
But, yeah, no, so that is Room, so... We have all these Oscar-nominated films reviewed now. Shall we perhaps take a look at some of the Oscar nominations and make our predictions?
As quickly as possible, let's do that, yes.
Okay, I think we would start with cinematography. We won't go through all the technical categories, because, I mean, there are, like, bits and pieces of stuff that are just kind of... You could nitpick about Danish Girl not getting hair and makeup or blah, blah, blah. But, like, we can't get into too nitty-gritty about that. We could mention song, I suppose.
No, sorry.
Just that 50 Shades of Grey is now an Oscar-nominated movie, because the song has been nominated, and I just find it galling that like the Academy couldn't find 5 better songs this year. But it's so they now have done this. They've done this. We live in a world where 50 Shades of Grey is an Oscar-nominated.
It's not about better songs. It's about better known song. That's why again I don't understand why Sam Smith got a nomination, because Writings on the Wall is fine. It's not Skyfall, and it shouldn't be there. It's also sad that is Spectre's only nomination. Now again, Spectre isn't great. It didn't deserve that nominations. I would have definitely given it best sound mixing or sound. What's the other sound one again? Sound
mixing and sound editing.
Sound editing, maybe. Yeah.
Please don't ask me to explain the difference.
No, I know the difference. I couldn't think of the name of it. Or even maybe, special effects or something like that. Massive explosion was the biggest in cinema history. So that could have been.
Visual effects is so hard to call because there's Mad Max and The Martian and Star Wars and Ex Machina. Previously on the podcast, I spoke to one of the visual effects artists on Ex Machina because I thought that was brilliant. So they might go for the smaller one that did something interesting, but I mean, you have these huge.
But Mad Max is so invisible that it's kind of the most impressive.
Yeah, and Star Wars, of course, is just the big blockbuster, so it often goes to that, regardless of quality. Hence, Transformers or whatever will get Oscars. I mean, like in terms of like visual accomplishment, though, I suppose the one technical category worth mentioning is cinematography, and I feel like it is competitive. We have Carol, The Hateful Eight, The Revenant, Sicario, and Mad Max: Fury Road. That's really strong this year, isn't it? Because those are all pretty well shot movies.
Who did which again?
I feel like if I had to, for my money, it's between The Revenant and Mad Max. It's going to be one or the other. That would mean if it's The Revenant, it would mean it's Emmanuel Lubezki's 3rd consecutive year in a row where he's won the Oscar for best cinematography. If it's Mad Max, looks amazing and it's very visually and technically accomplished.
Yeah,
so
Mad Max looks amazing, but I feel like it's very surface looking amazing. Like it's well kind of color graded and stuff. I think Carol deserves it more than what he did. That was interesting with the cinematography. Similarly, Sicario, Deacons is pretty much unassailable. Hateful Eight doesn't deserve it. Revenant looked great. I feel like personally I'd want Carol or Sicario to get it. Maybe Carol.
Well, I mean, the way we're going to go through these, I think we're going to talk about which one we want to win and then which one we think we'd win.
Okay, Revenant will win. I want Carol to win.
I want Revenant to win, and Revenant will win. It's just it's going to be a bit tricky for us trying to gauge how the Oscar voters vote, I think, because as we've been talking about the sort of demographic makeup of them before, but it's also just about what exactly is their taste, because there are some years where they do reward movies that like are more ambitious and do something creative, and other years they nominate something really safe and bland and it's forgotten a few years later. So that's
most years, yes.
Because the categories are so competitive this year, A lot of these are just so hard to call. I mean, I do know the Academy for years was voting by first past the post, where if you're voting in a category, you just pick one. And but that's how you end up having like Crash winning Best Picture, even though it was like a third or voters wanted it. So what they do now is they rank the votes. What this means, why this is relevant, is because you get the movies that are most broadly kind of liked by everyone, or it's still not an exactly proportional result, but you'll get the one that kind of generally pleased most people.
I think it's sufficient to say it's hard to call this year. Let's keep going to the list.
Well, I mean, your particular interest is in soundtracks. You pay attention to score. So for original score, we have Bridge of Spies, Carol, The Hateful Eight, Sicario, and Star Wars. Which of those?
Oh God! I mean, I've actually been listening to practically all those scores recently. I don't. Okay, Carol. Okay, Carol's I can't even think of it, so that's gone. Hateful Eight, Morricone, I love you. But to do one note. I mean, I want Sicario to win, obviously. I feel like Bridge of Spies will get it just because it's that kind of score, it's that kind of movie. It's very Oscar-y.
Well, you like Thomas Newman.
I like Thomas Newman, and especially since he didn't get nominated for Spectre and didn't win for Skyfall, I think I wouldn't mind him winning it, but I felt if John Williams had done Bridge of Spies, I would guarantee that would win it. I feel like because it isn't him, they might give it to someone else.
He did Star Wars, but people were saying it kind of doesn't really go any new directions.
I don't agree with that. People keep saying, Star Wars has no new hummable themes. I disagree. Ray's
hum
theme,
one right now.
Give me a second. Ray's one gets muddled in my head because it's similar to a different one.
Okay, well, so it's not going to be John Williams. He's not going to get
it. Sicario, okay.
I do like the reggae in the sort of equivalent of the cantina scene. I like that there's reggae in the Star Wars universe. Sicarios is really good, you say?
Okay, yeah. But we've been over it several times. Sicarios
I think
great.
I want Sicario to win.
Sicario
It stands out the most because it's a horror film soundtrack for a crime thriller movie. And
it works with everything, including Brooklyn trailers.
Yeah. Watch it with the Brooklyn trailer with the sound turned down. Oh, it's so funny.
We want Sicario to win.
Which one do we think will win, though?
I think it's between Bridge of Spies and Star Wars.
I remember the opening music from Carol, the sort of Philip Glassy kind of thing over the credits.
Yeah.
And I don't think it will be Star Wars. I think. Oh, damn it. This is only going to get worse as we go on, by the way, because the categories this year are all really competitive, so... Oh, shit. I want it to be Sicario. I think it could be Sicario, but it may more likely be Carol or I suppose.
That's Ray's theme. Ha! I can do it. It just took a second to get there.
Well, I guess I think John Williams will win then. he sure showed me.
Good night, folks.
We'll keep going, shall we? Through Best Adapted Screenplay.
Yes.
This is so competitive. We have The Big Short, Carol, The Martian, Room, and Brooklyn. It's not going to be Brooklyn, or I hope it isn't. Because while I will defend Brooklyn, I think it's okay, but it's there are problems with the writing of it, the way the main dramatic tension comes in 2/3 of the way in.
Which apparently isn't in the book, from what we've heard. The book's actually a better structured story than the film was, so that shouldn't win for
and
adapted,
there isn't much
definitely.
at stake, and it's kind of, so I think if Brooklyn wins anything, it's not going to be for that. I mean, what sometimes happens, this happened with The Imitation Game last year, where it's the kind of consolation prize for when it doesn't win anything else, or...
Yeah, I feel like Room will get this, and won't win anything else, or won't win much else, but I think I'd prefer it to go to... I think The Martian will actually get this.
You know what? My hunch is that The Martian, people really liked The Martian. Yeah. People liked how well written it was, like as an ensemble piece. How kind of unusual it was, where it made science a good thing, and it was kind of really good execution of like applying that to storytelling in the old sense of the word science fiction. That it wasn't like lightsabers and droids, but it was science stuff in a fiction context. So I want it to be Room.
I think I wanted to be Room or Carol.
I think it is between The Martian and The Big Short. Having seen The Big Short, I think they adapted what was a very dry book about the financial crisis and did sort of creative things with it where it just about gets away with breaking the fourth wall. The Martian, on the other hand, I think a lot of people generally like it. It's nominated for Best Picture. It's nominated for a lot of things. They may just give it to Drew Goddard just for thinking like, yeah, that was a really enjoyable movie. Everyone seemed to like. So I mean, that's my prediction there. Original screenplay, we have Bridge of Spies, which the Coen brothers co-wrote with Matt Charman. I Choose You. Alex Garland for Ex Machina. The Tom McCarthy and Josh Singer for Spotlight. And then we have the teams behind Inside Out and Straight Outta Compton.
Okay, super quickly. Bridge of Spies will win this. I want Ex Machina to win this.
I want Ex Machina to win this.
Yeah, correct.
Or maybe Straight Outta Compton. Maybe that'll be like the consolation prize to Straight Outta Compton.
The diversity issue.
Yeah, but then given their record so far, they probably won't. And also Inside Out is supposed to have been quite well written. I don't think it will be Bridge of Spies. I think
you're underestimating how safe they can bet sometimes, and I think that's the ideal safe bet movie this year.
You see, for me, Spotlight...
It's popular and decent, but also very safe.
Okay, but Spotlight's getting a lot of like buzz, and again, this isn't... Okay, the question of merit is Alex Garland writing Ex Machina obviously deserves the award by far, because that is a great screenplay for a brilliant movie. But in terms of trying to second guess the Oscar voters, I feel like Spotlight is getting nominated for lots of things. They'll want to give it something, and they'll probably feel like, in the same way The Big Short might get screenplay because they'll feel like it was making a statement about the financial crisis. Spotlight will have been highlighting the abuse of the cult, the Catholic Church, so they may give it to Spotlight, I think.
Okay. So finally for this page,
we have our notes here with the directing category. We have Adam McKay for The Big Short, George Miller for Mad Max, Alejandro González Iñárritu for The Revenant, Lenny Abramson for Room, and Tom McCarthy for Spotlight. Tom McCarthy was an actor in season 5 of The Wire. He's since directed movies, so as I said, Spotlight is a movie, hasn't been released here yet. It should be out in the next week or two, but it is about the Boston Globe and covering child abuse scandals in the Catholic Church back around 2001.
Okay, again, quickly, I think I kind of want either George Miller or Lenny to get this one. I think it'll go to Iñárritu.
I'm happy to put McKay out of the running. I think The Big Short is well directed. I don't think it'll win this, though. I want it to be George Miller, or Lenny Abramson. I think that would be a big deal for Irish film.
I think I want Mad Max to get Best Picture more than I want this to get Best Director.
Oh man, wait till we get to Best Picture, because I think
let's say Lenny that I want to win. I think Iñárritu will get it. You
know what? God damn it. Who do I want to win this? I suppose. I can't narrow it down. Yeah. I think this is a really super competitive category, like that they And again, I think going for McCarthy or McKay would be a safe choice on the part of the Oscars. But I think if they really do want to give a director their due recognition, it's Miller, Iñárritu, or Abramson. And I can certainly narrow it down to that 3 for you for what I want to happen and what I think will happen. But I can't... No, but again, even what I think will happen, it could be any of them. That
was very helpful. Sorry. Thank you for that.
This is a super competitive year for the Oscars. This is going to be
blurt out things like what I'm doing. Just blurt out names and it's fine.
Ooh, let's talk about actors maybe.
Can we quickly say who was left out of the directing category? I think What's His Face from It Follows could have been worthy of a nomination.
David Robert Mitchell.
Thank you. I knew for some reason David Mitchell is in my head. And finally, I would not have been adverse to Matthew Vaughn getting a nomination for Kingsman. Would never in a million years have happened, nor would he have won, nor would it have been deserved per se, but I would have liked to have seen it there. Okay, next one.
Best Supporting Actor. We have Batman, Bane, The Hulk, and Rocky Balboa, along with Mark Rylance for Bridge of Spies.
Okay.
He's who I want to win.
Yeah, very easy one. Rylance should win. Yes. I think you're right. Stallone will probably get it. If not him, Bale will get it again.
Or Tom Hardy. Because I think Tom Hardy's performance was quite strong in The Revenant, so I can see I'd be happy with him winning. I would be unhappy if Sylvester Stallone won, but I think that's the way they're going to go because he won the Golden Globe, and I feel like
haven't seen Creed. I'm going to see Creed, but I don't want to.
But they're just giving it to him because it's him, not for the and and as we were saying, plenty of other good actors in Creed from all reports, but it's focused on Stallone. I mean, we have. Screen Actors Guild Awards are usually the most reliable indicator of what will happen in the Oscars. Haven't happened yet, so yeah, so and those will give you a better idea of what might happen. When it comes to Best Supporting Actress, we have Jennifer Jason Leigh for The Hateful Eight, Rooney Mara and Carol, Rachel McAdams for Spotlight, Alicia Vikander for The Danish Girl, Kate Winslet for Steve Jobs. Had Alicia Vikander been nominated for Ex Machina rather than The Danish Girl, as she should have, this would be hers hands down without competition.
I don't think. I think she actually has a better chance of winning it for Danish Girl than Ex Machina, but I think she deserves it more for Ex Machina than Danish Girl.
That's fair enough. I hope she does win because I really like her. I think she was strong in both Ex Machina and Danish Girl. It's just that in Ex Machina, her character gets more to do. She's naive and cunning and so on. She gets lots different things to do. I also feel like her character really carried the movie with Redmayne, that she should be in the lead actress category, as should Rooney Mara for Carol. She's the main character in Carol, but it's Kate Blanchett nominated in lead actress rather than her.
It's weird. It's like that thing with Jennifer Lawrence being nominated for Best Supporting Actress for Winter's Bone, and she was literally the only person on screen for most of that movie. It's the way they know they have the best chance of winning. That's why I think Mara actually probably will win this, and I wouldn't be against her winning this. I don't know who else. I mean, I actually wouldn't mind seeing Lee win this.
I would hate that. Because I feel like, first of all, her character in The Hateful Eight just...
It was pantomime, but it was good.
It was all artifice. It was tough and tenacious and rough, but it was all superficial traits. It was a plot. She was a plot device. She was a plot device and damsel in distress, and she hagged it up and hammed it up. But that doesn't mean it's a good performance. I'll be really angry if Lee wins.
No, but she's, I think, the Christoph Waltz of this year. Like, she is the...
No, she's not that good.
No, I think like Django Christoph Waltz, which he won the Oscar for as well. Like, that's the level she's at, which is fine. It's good. I'd prefer Mara to win it, but I'd be okay if she won it.
I want Vikander to win. I think it will be either Mara or Winslet, because people seem to like Winslet in the Steve Jobs movie for some reason. So she's won the Golden Globe.
I'd like to. I'd love Vikander if it was Ex Machina. I don't really want her to win it for Danish Girl.
I'd be happy with her winning it for Danish Girl. Like I said, just Ex Machina is so much better.
Yes.
When it comes to Best Actress, like I said, it's the same woman at different stages of her life. It's Saoirse Ronan, Ireland's Own, Jennifer Lawrence, Brie Larson, Kate Blanchett, and Charlotte Rampling. It definitely should be Brie Larson. I think it will be.
I think it'll be Kate Blanchett because it's always going to be Kate Blanchett. Now, the weird thing is, I'm not against her winning this because even though she's won once before, hasn't she? I think. Yes, she'll win one again. But even still, this was probably one of her best performances she's ever done. She kind of deserves an Oscar for this, but she already has an Oscar, so I don't think she needs another one. So I still
give
think
it to Brie Larson or Saoirse Ronan.
No,
I'd be so happy about that.
I would just be very bored by that. It's I don't think it's out of the running. I think that could happen. I would like to see Rampling win this purely because she'll never get a chance at this, and that'd be nice.
I was gonna ask. You saw 45 Years. Some years they have this. They've done this in previous years where they have the elderly woman candidate, and they don't give it to her. They just tease her basically. They make her think, oh, maybe this will be my one and only chance.
But she has to get dressed up and go to Hollywood.
Oh, this got so dark. Oh, but yeah. So is Charlotte Rampling's performance Oscar worthy?
I think so. Yes.
Do you think it could win without? Or would that just be too much of a curveball?
I think it's too much. I think she could win. I don't think she will. I think Blanchett will win it, but I think she could win. And I'd like to see her win. I kind of want to see Brie Larson win too, so
I'm kind of it's this whole thing of merit versus what are the Academy going to do. If the Academy have some semblance of sanity, it will be Brie Larson because it was just such more stronger acting than even Kate Blanchett, who is phenomenal in pretty much everything she does.
I feel Brie Larson is enough of a kind of Jennifer Lawrence 2.0 that they could give it to her, but I think I want Rampling. It will be Blanchett.
When it comes to Best Actor, again, I mean, we have Bryan Cranston for Trumbo, Matt Damon for The Martian, Leonardo DiCaprio for The Revenant. It is, isn't it? Michael Fassbender for Steve Jobs, flying the Irish flag, and I suppose German flag for German viewers, and Eddie Redmayne for The Danish Girl.
I kind of want none of them to win it.
I think my want and think are the same on the... you know what? No, the thought just occurred to me they might give it to Matt Damon, but I don't think they... Nah.
I think that'd be a very funny feud to Leonardo DiCaprio if they did that.
Matt Damon. Okay, my want and think are the same on this, because I think it's a dead heat between DiCaprio and Redmayne. I think their performances were just about as good as each other. It's probably leaning stronger towards DiCaprio because people feel like it's his time, and it's certainly one of, like I said, in the top 2 or 3 of his career. So so I want it to be either of them. I'd be happy enough with either of them, and it will be one of them.
I feel like it will be Redmayne. I don't actually really like any of the nominations there. I'll say I'd like it to be Bryan Cranston because I like Bryan Cranston. I've not seen that movie. Don't even know what movie that is, but I like Bryan Cranston.
He plays a screenwriter during the McCarthy era, and it hasn't been released here yet. I'm looking forward to
I'd
it.
like to see him give a speech. It'd probably be quite funny. That's the only reason I have to have a horse in this race. It'll probably be Redmayne though. I think it will be Redmayne.
What will be funny is years from now when the biopic of Leonardo DiCaprio gets made, that actor will surely win the Oscar for playing Leonardo DiCaprio. Or you could make that the
At which
movie.
point a full-on Howard Hughes DiCaprio will just burn down a hospital or something.
No, what I want, you could make a movie about this where there's an actor called Alden Ehrenreich. He was in the Francis Ford Coppola movie Tetro. He's basically an actor who looks a lot like it and behaves like a young Leonardo DiCaprio. You can have a movie where he's playing Leonardo DiCaprio. Leonardo DiCaprio is playing himself, advising him on the role. And when he wins the Oscar, DiCaprio goes apeshit and starts running after him, Jack Torrance style, trying to hunt him down and murder him. That would be hilarious. Mr. DiCaprio, if you're listening, I will write this screenplay for you.
Just on that note, I feel Evan Peters is also a good young DiCaprio, but that's it.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway, so finally,
we have the Best Picture category, and this is where my brain is going to explode. This feels like such a dead heat between all 8 of these movies. This is the thing that bothers me about the Oscars, though, that it used to be 5 for Best Picture, then it was 10, now it's 8, and then the smaller categories, some years it's 3, others it's 5. It's all a bit arbitrary. We have The Big Short, Spotlight, Bridge of Spies, Our Beloved Brooklyn, Room, so those are 2 movies flying the Irish flag, Mad Max Fury Road, The Revenant, and The Martian. Okay, now...
It's an easy one to say which one I want to win, Mad Max, so that'd be amazing.
Say Brooklyn, because it would annoy you. So that's my want. No, of course not, because Brooklyn is...
So undeserving.
However much...
So undeserving.
You see, here's the thing. I think... With Room, yes, let's let all those Irish people get excited about Room winning stuff. With Brooklyn, it's I think it's fine for what it is trying to be. I don't think it's quite as Oscar worthy as this. It obviously just struck a chord with critics and Academy voters because I guess what it does is there have been movies about immigration before, but maybe this is the first time it was made by, like, in this case, Irish people, and it was that perspective on it.
Well,
and
Americans have that whole Irish fetishization anyway, so it makes
there's that,
sense.
but there's also the fact that migration is just generally becoming more and more of a thing now with a globalized world, so maybe it just came along at the right time where people thought, like, that bit of the movie is like something I went through, because it's so, like, broad and safe. So, you know, it's not going to be that. It's...
You see, I think it could be Brooklyn. I really do. I think that's the exact kind of King's Speechy... What's the Slumdog Millionaire kind of level of safe
Slumdog Millionaire is
Oscar
good
kind of movie.
I
think
King's Speech is good as well. It's just really safe.
I actually haven't seen Slumdog Millionaire or King's Speech. I'm going by purely what the...
You absolute... Slumdog Millionaire is a really creative movie. Here, that kind of movie you're describing, though, where they just go for the really safe choice... I feel like, okay, Big Short and Spotlight seem like that kind of movie, which is why I think it could be one of those. But the way you're describing it, I think it could be Bridge of Spies or even The Martian. Because like I said, it'll be the one out of those 8 which the most people just generally liked. So it could be a kind of mushy middle of either one of those. I think if they're going by merit and they're awarding what is, like, genuinely the best film, it's between The Revenant, Room, and Mad Max. And... like, in terms of what I want, I'd say either Room or Mad Max. I get really giddy about the idea of Mad Max winning Best Picture and just being the representation of, like, you know, of the craft of filmmaking. It would probably have the same effect if George Miller gets Best Director. It's possible the Oscars are just trolling us by including Mad Max at all. It's just getting everyone's hopes up that, like, oh, are they going to give it to it? It's just like... And also, like, these movies are nominated. Carol and The Danish Girl aren't. Some people thought Star Wars might get in, but sure, it's just going to have its billions of dollars to, you know, as consolation.
And had you asked me at the start of last year, I would have been like, I think Spectre has a good chance of being in there, but...
But then we saw Spectre.
And no, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay, I think... So, I want Mad Max to win it. I think it's a 3-way maybe... No, sorry, 4-way maybe between Room, Mad Max, Bridge of Spies, and Brooklyn. I think the more likely of those 2 are Bridge of Spies and Brooklyn. I think Room is sort of a dark horse possibility. I think Mad Max should and might, but I do think it'll be between Bridge of Spies and Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think what my want, as in the merit of it, would be either Room or Mad Max. When it comes to my prediction as to what I think will happen at the Oscars, I think my problem is Big Short and Spotlight are throwing me off, because those are really Oscar baity movies, so I feel like it might go to one of them. if they don't each win the screenplay in their respective categories.
Mm.
Because I mean, it's either that or it's either that kind of safe Oscar movie or it's Bridge of Spies or The Martian. I don't even think I can rule out Revenant at this point. We have my wants clear, just in terms of what I think will happen. This is really too close to call for me. It's just so competitive because I think that aside from Brooklyn, which is serviceable, I think these are all strong movies.
Okay, I tell you what, I'm actually going to go out on a limb here and say it's going to be Brooklyn. Actually, honestly to God, I think it's going to be Brooklyn.
I would be delighted if that happened. That would be a big deal for Irish cinema.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was Brooklyn, though.
Let's hope it's Brooklyn or Room. How about that?
No, let's hope it's Mad Max. I think it will be Brooklyn, but let's hope it's Mad Max.
I'm really, really hoping it's Mad Max. That would be just so... I mean, I don't think... Yeah. Like I said, I think I'd be happy with any of them, but I will be somewhat disappointed if it isn't Mad Max or Room. But there's a pretty strong year for film, and I think just all these categories are quite competitive, except actors. And this will be actually an interesting year to watch and see what happens. And again, it's so hard to second guess the Oscar voters' sensibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I find, especially since a lot of these are Oscar baities, but they're different types of Oscar baities. So and then there are all sorts of surprises about movies getting nominated for this, but then not that, or like Carol being a big example of this.
Mm-hmm.
We thought it was a sure thing for like director and picture, or I did anyway.
I'm surprised it's not in Best Picture, to be honest. I'm actually surprised Hateful Eight isn't in there too, not because it deserves it, but because I just think it seems the kind of movie they would put in. Like as Tarantino movies go, it's very safe and very Oscar friendly. Like it's just dialogue heavy in one room, and it's.
Yeah, but that's it. It's real failure of visual storytelling. So I'm so happy it wasn't considered in that.
No, it's not.
Whereas all these other movies actually get visual storytelling. I mean, especially Mad Max and Revenant.
Apart from Brooklyn,
and
which
Martian,
is hacky and shit.
Oh god, I mean, we have.
Can you tell she's Irish abroad because she's wearing green, white, and orange, walking around the Americas? And on that note, Brooklyn. I'm saying it now. Brooklyn's going to win, and I won't be surprised. I won't be mad. I'll just be disappointed.
What do you want to happen? What do you think will happen? Tweet us at Film Ireland. Why not? And we can keep this discussion going right up until the ceremony at the end of February. So yeah, this is our preview of the Oscars. We're going to be watching it closely, I think, because as we said, it's so competitive. It's such a tight competition. I'm genuinely excited this year. It's like I kind of wasn't that much into it in recent years, but now, yeah, let's see what happens. We will be with you again before then, though, in the month of February. So until then, keep well. I'm Jonathan Victory.
And I'm Richard Drum. Goodbye.